unionization drama was probably going to lose its momentum. And as you can see, when I made that call in the opening, Robinhood fell right after that. I also made a call suggesting that it was really good that Symbotic was holding on to the 42.98 line, and it could be a breakout catalyst towards 50. As you can see, Symbotic is absolutely crushing it. Somebody in the chat here just actually reminded me of it. Thank you for saying that, because they're like, hey, thanks, good call this morning. Now, can't always guarantee success, but last few alpha reports, actually last many alpha reports, I feel like you've been killing it. If you haven't tried it out yet, go to meetkevin.com. Check out the one-time payment option we have. You pay once and you're in forever. Now, let's understand what's going on with the labor market. Why I say we're in a late phase of the labor cycle. It's very simple. Of the 147,000 jobs that we created, 90% of the gains came from healthcare and local government employment. In fact, 73,000 came from government. Usually when we're in a later stage of the employment cycle, the government is more capable of hiring. Note that local and county and state governments aren't affected by Doge. And so when the local governments can hire, it's usually when it's harder or when it's easier to compete against the private sector, because the private sector really isn't creating jobs. And so when we jump into what we had in the labor report this morning, what we really saw was a labor report that barely showed us any private sector job growth. 10%, or about 15,000 jobs, were created by the private sector outside of healthcare and government. At the same time, what we've seen over the last 3 months is a very weird plummeting of the labor force participation rate. The labor force participation rate is really sensitive. We should pull up sort of a larger chart of it. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll pull it up on the St. Louis Fred database here. But as you can see, the labor force participation rate, it moves by decimals. So it moves like, it seems like it's a very small number that moves. What we've seen in the last 3 months is we've seen this decline in the labor force participation rate by basically 1 percentage point, well, 1.1 every single month. And you start seeing that somewhat of a rotation down. Now, this could be due to many things. This could be due to people leaving the labor force because they're retiring. It could be because they're frustrated and that they're discouraged, that they're not finding work, and they're saying, you know what, F it, I'll just not work. So retiring, leaving the labor force, or frankly, you could also be in an environment where you just find people are getting deported. And so usually when people leave, you want to pay attention to sort of balance out, like, is this decline in the labor force participation rate an issue? You usually want to look at the 27 weeks unemployed level as well to try to understand how many people are just like, they want a job, but they just can't get one, and they're more than 6 months unemployed. And you generally also find that the labor force participation rate stagnates or declines in recessionary environments, right? So just look at history over here. When you go into recessionary environments is typically when you get the downtrends. When you're in expansionary environments, you get the uptrends. So uptrends and expansion, either deceleration or stagnation in recession. Here you can see stagnation in recessionary environments, acceleration during periods of growth. So you can really see our growth period, 2021 all the way into 2023. And then in 24, we really started hitting a turning point. Now, sometimes it doesn't always equal recession, though, because, it's hard to say, because look over here, 2002, 2003, early 2003, these were still environments where we were coming out of the dot-com bubble. So they could also be post-recessionary reverberations. You didn't really see the participation rate start expanding until 2005. And you could actually see the participation rate just kept collapsing following 2011 all the way out to 2015. So the participation rate isn't always a really useful tool to say, we're definitely having problems in a recessionary state. This is why we like to look at the unemployment rate, the 27 weeks or more unemployed rate. You can see this has popped up again, but not meaningfully above our April high over here. We're just more of an environment where, we're getting more 27 weeks or more unemployed, but we're not at a level where we're, skyrocketing by any means. So overall, this is good. Usually you see a skyrocketing 27-week unemployed level in a later portion of a recession. these higher reverberations at a more stagnated level, they could be symptomatic of a 2005 or 2006. And so when I say we're in like a later stage where you're getting local, state government hiring, you're getting healthcare hiring, and very, very little private hiring, it just tells you you're probably somewhere in like a 2006, 2007-ish, like a 6, 7-ish, somewhere on there. Not necessarily some kind of recessionary 08, 09 collapse. So overall, this is a good thing. This is one of the reasons why we saw the unemployment rate go down. It's one of the reasons why we're seeing the odds of a rate cut in July now basically get crushed. Now, what it does set you up for is potentially a layoff cycle. Of course, but that's always the concern, that we would have some kind of layoff cycle that comes. And really, we're just not seeing that many announced layoffs. Yes, we're seeing these sort of rolling announcements that get these, breaking news headlines. Microsoft lays off 9,000 here or there, or whatever. But what you really need to get a real layoff crisis, some kind of shock, where small businesses across the board are going, I can't handle it anymore. I have to lay off. And we're not seeing that, which is frankly very good. So 147,000, obviously better than expected. People talk about revisions. We actually revised last month's employment numbers up. Now, in fairness, in August, we get these 6-month revisions, which last year were so negative on like an entire half year that we ended up having a really nasty August. But there's nothing to say in these last 2 employment reports that is very bearish. It's very hard to find anything bearish in here. Yes, you could look at the households numbers. Households dropped about 130,000. So yes, we are seeing fewer people participate. The labor force is shrinking. Household number down, labor force participation down. Both of those numbers contributing to a weaker market when it comes to getting a job. But again, the one thing that makes that beverage curve so weird, the lack of layoffs. And that's the same thing that's keeping the unemployment rate now moving down, because we're not seeing layoffs. And potentially, while people are exiting for deportation reasons or retirement reasons or whatever, nothing to really say there's this huge negative scary catalyst. And that's why I think what we're seeing in markets broadly is that the 10-2 yield curve is actually moving in a direction of less shock. So you can see the 10-2 curve, I'll pull that up here, the 10-2 curve right now is sitting at 46, 45 now, which is significantly lower than what we saw yesterday. Yesterday, we were starting somewhere around 55 to 52. Then we got the Vietnam trade deal, which is good news. It's the first trade deal that we have with a deficit country. Fantastic, finally. Now, yeah, the rates are higher than we expected. Is it good that we have a 20% tariff rate on Vietnam? I mean, no. It's going to create deadweight loss. It's going to show up in earnings somewhere. But does it matter? Like, does Amazon care? Do the consumers care? Probably not. Who's probably going to care? Probably the companies that have to import, like the Nikes. They're going to have to beat up their manufacturers, and they'll probably eat some of it too. Now, is that an economically horrible thing? No. In fact, we're making progress, which creates certainty. Now you get certainty on tariffs, you get certainty on jobs, reduces the urgency for the Federal Reserve to panic cut. However, I do think the Federal Reserve, like Jay Powell, he's going to look at these numbers and going to go, these are numbers that they basically guarantee us that we are not going to be resilient against layoffs. Because again, we only created 15,000 private sector jobs outside of healthcare and state and local government, which is very, very weak, right? So that's why I say late cycle. So think about it sort of like the business cycle. You're not like in the crash portion, but you're just sort of like, you're on that curve where you're not growing. You're not on the growing side of the curve. You're on sort of the slowing side of the curve. Does that mean things are going to go crap tomorrow and sell everything? Of course not. But does it mean we're prone to very crappy labor reports if people started losing their job? Yeah, but that's been a big if for like a year now, right? We've been waiting for these layoffs, and they frankly haven't come. So, which is good. Overall, it's a bullish thing for the economy. So we'll see. We'll see how things develop. All I know right now is Symbotic keeps kicking butt. And actually, if you think about it, the labor market and the labor market surveys that we're getting might actually be great for a company like Symbotic, because Symbotic is a robotics company. And I don't want to hijack a jobs, report discussion to talk about Symbotic, but I kind of like Symbotic. So I've been doing fundamental analysis on Symbotic for a while now, not only on the YouTube channel, but in our course member live streams. We've been talking about this one for a while. Symbotic's a very interesting company because in an expansionary economy, this is a really fantastic company, because what you have is essentially the robots that support warehouse infrastructure. So think Walmart, Walmart's expansion in Mexico, Walmart's distribution centers in America, other companies like Target that start waking up and realizing, wow, we need robots, we need to adapt. Obviously, Amazon buys a lot of its own robotics companies, but Symbotic is sort of the way to roboticize your warehouses if you don't have that internal staff. And in an environment where we're moving away from more expensive labor towards more AI and robotics, I think Symbotic is a very interesting play, and I don't think its valuation is so terribly unreasonable. Let's run the valuation on it, though, because it's been a minute since I've run the price earnings on it. So let me see here. So Symbotic.
Business loans are not one size fits all. Cerebro Capital can help you find the best loan options, specifically tailored to your mid-market business's unique story.
You're only looking at like 10 cents of earnings, but the earnings are expected to explode for it. This is based on Wall Street's expectations, right? So let's look at 46 divided by, let's see here, 46 divided by 10 cents. Yeah, I mean, technically for this year's PE ratio, it sits at 460, which is crazy, right? Because their earnings are 10 cents, because you're coming out of a loss. So that's something to keep in mind. When you transition from loss to positive, you're always going to have what looks like a very expensive PE ratio. However, that's expected to get to 41 cents in 26. It's expected to get to 89 cents in 2028, $1.50 in 27, $1.55 in 28, and $2 in 2029. So on an EPS growth basis, EPS growth is expected to grow 305%, 116%, 74%, and 33% divided by 4. You're looking about 132 on a growth rate for EPS expected. So if you divide that out, you're sitting at about a 3 peg. It's getting a little bit on the pricey side. And this is why I liked it so much when it was over here on the 20, because it was trading for like a 1.5 peg, right? That said, right now it's got momentum. And that's always a funny transition where you go from like, wow, this is good fundamentals, to whoa, it has momentum. And that's going to be something to pay attention to in an environment where we continue to see expansion of markets, because we're not getting bad data. People are going to be really looking for momentum plays and things that do benefit in an expansionary environment. I mean, it's one of the reasons I think Amazon is up today, because, hey, good jobs mean more people can spend, right? Maybe government jobs, healthcare jobs, there's still jobs. Private sector really isn't hiring, but people are trading Amazon up, which is suggestive of potentially warehouses trading up as well. Something interesting to pay attention to. But that's sort of my distillation here. Not great, not terrible. That's sort of like the Chernobyl line that I keep referencing. But it's important because it is true. This is not an economy that's creating jobs everywhere. These are not broad-based gains. These are late cycle reports that show us that we are indeed prone to problems. But those problems could be months away or they could be years away. There's really no way to bet on that. So we'll see. Anyway, as far as the Fed and the odds of them cutting, I know that's something that's been interesting. So we are now at a 6.7% chance of cutting for July. Now this is actually quite remarkable. We went from almost entirely pricing in a guaranteed cut in September to now only having a 69% chance, so a 2/3 chance of cutting in September. So you've really seen a plummet in the odds of a rate cut, not only for July, but also for September. As far as data that's coming out, we did just get S&P Global Services. They came in slightly weaker than expected on the services side, composite fractionally higher, both in the expansionary territory, so not necessarily anything to phone home about here. S&P services read, broadly in line over here with expectations. Okay, so that gives us an overview of some of what's going on this morning and my take on it. Again, check out those courses over at meetkevin.com. Look at that, Symbiotics now almost up 10%. It's remarkable. Almost up 10%. That's serious momentum over here. And again, if you want this sort of heads up, remember I sent this signal out here before any of the explosion, which is kind of cool. Check out the Alpha report if you haven't yet. And if you're an existing course member, remember you can actually use the Meet Kevin app to get your Alpha reports, which is great because you don't have to rely on like YouTube or Discord notifications or whatever, some other app. Just through there, customize your notifications. If you're not a course member, you can get the Meet Kevin app too if you want. It just doesn't have the Alpha report. Just have that's your course members. And as always, if you ever have any questions, you can email staff@meetkevin.com. I guess we may as well look at ISM services as well because those come out in about 10 seconds. So ISM services, slight beat, prices paid comes in lower. That's good. New orders, big beat. Employment misses, but new orders, that big beat, that's bullish. So another, both of these data reports here on the surveys, which are technically soft data, S&P Global and ISM Services, both of these are good, especially since you have better than expected prices paid there on the ISM survey, which is fantastic. These are things you want. This is good for the market and the economy. And look at that. Qs keep kicking butt, which was also in our Alpha report this morning. Bearish hood, bullish Qs, bullish Symbiotic. And I also said that I thought Tesla might get stuck under 318. That there wasn't really a catalyst for it to collapse, like it wasn't a short catalyst, but it was, not something that necessarily was primed for a breakout today. I don't know. Alpha report's got something cooking today.
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising.
Or of all the books that I've written, it's the most important thing for anyone to find in life. Because when you find out what you were meant to create, what your task is, what you say your talent lies in, there has to be, of course, an element of love in it. The whole world just opens up, right? You will gain power. You will be good in the seduction game. Men or women will come to you.
Robert Greene, we were saying off mic, I have been trying to get you on this pod for 6 months, and I feel like I knew you before you were famous, but unfortunately you're now famous, but I'm still really happy that you're here. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Scott. My pleasure.
You kind of pop up and you give this really thoughtful advice from someone who's led a pretty robust and experienced life, probably with some ups and downs. I would just love to get your origin story. I don't actually know much about you.
Well, I don't know how far back I should go. From Los Angeles, and basically I knew from an early age that I wanted to be a writer. Just couldn't figure out what was the right form of writing that fit me, that suited me. So after graduating university, I went to Berkeley and then to the University of Wisconsin in Madison. I got into journalism. I lived in New York for 4 years. I worked at various different magazines, like Esquire magazine was my first job. And I kind of, I hated journalism. It was a terrible fit for me because I was a classics major in university. My subject was ancient Greek and Latin. And my time frame is like in thousands of years. And I like books that last hundreds of years, and writing that has ancient and wisdom that lasts. And here journalism was like, you'd write something and then the next day it was completely forgotten. It was just went against all of my instincts. So I got out of journalism. I lived in Europe for about 5-6 years. I backpacked. I had jobs in Ireland. I had a job in London. I worked in a hotel in Paris. I taught English in Barcelona. You name it, I did it. And I tried writing novels, and that failed. And finally, I came back to Los Angeles, where I'm from. My father wasn't well. I got a job in Hollywood, thinking Hollywood was the answer for me. Screenplays and working, the glamour and all. And that was the worst fit of all, because you have no control, you have no power as a writer. You have like 800 people coming in after you and changing everything that you write. And it's kind of a soulless world, and I just hated it. Then I got the chance. I was in Italy for one of my thousands of different jobs, and I met a man who's a book packager. He asked me if I had an idea for a book. And suddenly I was very depressed. I was in my late 30s, and I just felt like my life wasn't adding up to anything. And I just kind of spouted out to him all of this stuff that was brewing inside of me about power, about history, about Louis XIV, who I was reading a lot about Machiavelli. I kind of improvised the 48 Laws of Power, and he got so excited. He said, "I'll pay you to live while you write this book, and then I'll package it." And that's sort of my origin story. And it's been an incredible journey since then.
That's the professional side. To the extent you're comfortable, it sounded like you had a life that didn't foot well to long-term relationships, going around the world kind of doing what you want to do. Like, talk about that side of your life.
Well, I've been in a relationship where we're now married. We've been together for 30-some years. So I have had a relationship. Prior to that, I had many different relationships, because as you said, I traveled a lot. And I don't have any children. My children are my 7 books, I consider. I have cats. I'm a big animal lover. I don't know. What else would you want to know about the personal side? It's not very exciting. I just live in my house and I write.
I find you such a fascinating person. I was just curious to kind of get some of the pillars there. You write a lot about, I would argue you're kind of the premier thought leader on the concept and the term or the practice of power. And that's where I'd like to start. Can you define power?
Well, there are many ways to approach that subject, but the way I like to look at it is there's much in life that we have no control over, practically almost the entire it's circumstances that we have no control over. But there's a small margin that we can control, and particularly in dealing with people, because we're a social animal and power is a social game. It's not a game of algorithms, etc. It's a completely social game. And people are very complex and people are very difficult. And so power is an ability to understand people's psychology and to move them in the direction that you want or that you need them to move in, so that you don't have all of this friction in your life, you don't have all of this resistance. You know how to get people to do things that are in your interest, but they don't even realize they're doing that in your interest. So it's increasing that tiny margin of control that you have over life from like 1% to like 2 or 3 or 4%, so that you have a sense that you can control events in your life. And a lot of that has to do with controlling yourself, with power over yourself. If you're somebody that can't control your own emotions, a lot of the laws of power have to deal with that. So like always say less than necessary, learning how to talk less in the right circumstances, learning how to manage your appearances. A lot of it has to do with self-control. So that's kind of my long-winded answer about what power is.
You speak about how we're all born actors and how part of being a social animal is basically being an actor. What did you mean by that?
Well, it was for thousands of years, it was the governing metaphor for human life was the theater and acting, particularly like in the 18th century, where everybody thought they were an actor. When you entered the public realm, you were an actor. We've kind of lost that idea. Everything now is all about being authentic, etc. But if you look at children from a very early age, children are continually acting. They're continually putting on the mask that they need to get what they want from their parents, to please them or to have a fit or whatever. They're consummate actors, and they love play acting and role playing. So it's something that comes very bred in us very deeply. And when you're in the social realm, people may not like to hear this, but you're never ever completely yourself. You're always putting on a role. You don't talk the same way to your father as you do to your children. You don't talk to your boss the same way that you talk to people who work for you, on and on. So in every situation in life, unconsciously most often, you're kind of crafting how you behave, how people see you, according to the people that you're with. You are an actor. Some people are conscious actors and they're better at it. Most of us are unconscious. We just sort of drift through life, kind of playing the role that we think is proper, and often making lots of mistakes. But we are all continually acting. Even in the moment where you're thinking you're being 100% yourself, there's still an element of acting when there are other people involved.
So how would you coach a young person, a young man or woman who thinks, okay, I buy into this notion that we're all playing different roles in different environments to maximize success and reward in those environments? What do you think is the right training for someone who can establish that social capital faster than their peer group?
Well, you have to be self-aware. First of all, you have to be aware of the concept. So a lot of young people aren't aware of that concept. They think that what matters is just being themselves. That's just why they get in a lot of trouble. They post things on social media, not realizing that it's going to become public. People are going to read it, and they're going to see things about your character they don't want to be exposed. So you have to be aware of the phenomenon. That's rule number one. And once you're aware of the phenomenon, then you realize that people judge you on appearances. Unfortunately, that's just the way things are. And so you have to manage those appearances. You have to craft them for each particular audience that you're dealing with. So when you're in the work world, you have to create the mask, if you want to call it that fits that environment. Now, yes, you can be creative, you can be a weirdo, you can dress differently, particularly in the world today, but still there are social roles. Still there are rules, still there are things that you have to conform to. You can't completely be yourself. I remember I went to Microsoft once to give a talk, and everybody there was kind of dressed alike, really buttoned down, kind of looking like the head of, I forget his name, Microsoft. And then I worked at American Apparel. I was on the board of directors there, and everybody was, completely dressed differently. And if you looked like somebody that dressed in Microsoft, people would have laughed at you. You're too straight, right? So every place that you deal with has kind of rules about how people look, how they dress, how they behave. You have to learn how to fit into that environment. So you have to be self-aware, and you're not the same way when you're at the work world. When you're in the social world, you kind of change, you shift the mask that you're wearing. But you're aware of the fact that people are judging you on appearances. And then based on who you're dealing with, because that's just the culture, you're dealing with individuals all the time. You have to kind of be sensitive to who that particular person is and their insecurities and their problems, and you have to kind of craft the role that you're playing, the acting that you're doing, on their personality, their quirks, their tastes, their personalities. It's just a matter of being aware and observing. If you can become a social observer, if in any environment you can pay deep attention to the people around you and get kind of an intuitive sense of who they are and what their tastes are like, then you'll be a very successful actor in this game.
That goes to one of your themes, and that is a fundamental thing that people need to understand is that people have egos. Talk a little bit more about that insight and what we see in business and politics, or even our personal lives, and the role that understanding everyone has an ego plays.
Well, everybody has one, as you say, and a common mistake is to think that somebody who's very powerful, for instance, like your boss, doesn't have an ego because or doesn't have insecurities. Of course, we know they have an ego, but they don't have insecurities. And that insecurities are very much tied into their ego. So the more ego that you have, the more insecurities that you have. And so law number one is never outshine the master. So if you try so hard to please people in the company or in the group, the person above you is going to think that you're that you're trying to outdo them, that you're better than they are. You're triggering their insecurities. That's part of their ego, and you're going to be in trouble. And so you have to realize that everybody around you has these insecurities, has these egos. And instead of inadvertently tripping on them, inadvertently triggering them, which is what a lot of people do in life, you have to be aware that the person you're dealing with has these insecurities, wants to be appreciated, wants to be validation. The great American psychologist William James said that validation is the single greatest human need. People have this deep desire to be validated for who they are, for the work that they do, for their values, etc. That's a very important part of their ego. So being aware of that, being aware that you could be inadvertently offending them in some way, will really improve that. Just being aware of their particular insecurities. And law number one is law number one because I violated it prior to writing the book several times. And I've accumulated stories from almost everybody that I've dealt with in my life, podcasters, etc. People who've come to me for advice. And every single person I talk to has had stories like that where they inadvertently made their boss or somebody around them feel insecure and then paid a price for it. So just be aware that everybody has this, everybody has their insecurities, and the more you can pay attention to that, the less turmoil and drama that you will inadvertently create in your life.
That really hits because I think a lot about addiction, and I think everyone has a certain amount of addiction, and I've recognized that I'm addicted to the affirmation of strangers, and that I think that's probably a component of my success, but I try and modulate it, that if you're too concerned about what people you're not going to meet, and not concerned enough about the people in your life, you have an issue. So you suggest that power is a skill, something you can learn. If someone is listening right now and feels powerless, stuck at work, lacking influence, kind of what you described in your late 30s, what's sort of the first mindset shift or kind of cognitive behavior, or what actions would you suggest such that they feel they have more agency, more power to get unstuck?
Well, it depends on the circumstances, obviously. So if their problem has to do with their career and their job and they're not going anywhere, and that's the source of their powerlessness, then I go back to something that I wrote in my 4th book, Mastery, and figuring out what your life's task is, what you were meant to create, what your destiny is, and the career that actually suits you if you're young enough to make that change. And heading in the direction that you were suited in is a great source of power. So the feeling I had that almost made me quite suicidal when I was in my 30s was I was powerless because the career choices I had made weren't appropriate for me. So that can be a major source of powerlessness. The other thing is to become much more aware of the people around you. So what's happening in the world today is everybody is turning inward. Everybody is becoming not an introvert, but they're becoming much, much less observant of people because they're so locked in their virtual worlds. They're not paying attention to the kind of nonverbal cues that people are giving. And so the main thing is for power in the social realm is you want to turn that around and put less attention on yourself and more attention on the people that you're dealing with, and be excited about that. So in order to understand the social game, which is the source of power, you have to kind of want it. You have to kind of love being around people and love observing them. But today people have become very inward. They're not observing enough, and those kind of skills are degrading. And when you don't have social skills, when you don't know how to say and be the right kind of person in social situations, you're never going to have power. So it's a matter of becoming a consummate observer of people that I think is the main thing that will turn you around. Now that's easier said than done, but you have to kind of take baby steps in this. You can't transform yourself overnight into a great social observer. You have to put yourself out there more in the world. You have to get outside of your virtual worlds. You have to actually go to bars. You have to go to clubs. You have to mingle with people. You have to become more social. Social is a skill. And if you develop that kind of skill, then the power game becomes much smoother for you when you understand how to deal with difficult people, because there are a lot of toxic people out there. You're observing and you understand the nuances of all the different people that you're dealing with. So those are some of the things that I would recommend.
We'll be right back after a quick break. Support for the show comes from Grooms. If you've ever gone down the rabbit hole of trying different nutrition solutions, you've likely had the thought, surely there's a way to improve my skin, gut health, immunity, and brain fog without offending my taste bud. Gruns. We talk a lot about struggling young men on the program, and that our belief is we're evolving a new species of asexual, asocial male. And I worry that there's just millions of young men who aren't developing any social skills other than video games. And they're just, if they don't establish those skills by the time they're 30, it's going to hurt them in a lot of dimensions. Do you have any thoughts on, other than just obviously being more social, do you have any thoughts on government policy or general changes in our culture to help younger people get more socialized and develop those skills you're talking about?
I don't know if there's necessarily a government program that would cover it, because as you say, it is a cultural problem. It's more a matter of technology is really at fault here. I mean, so for instance, when it comes to dating, and I hate sounding like I'm somebody so old that I'm kind of preaching from another era or something, but in the era where you just date by swiping on a phone, you're not going out there, you're not putting yourself out there and having that possibility of rejection and having to deal with people in the flesh and seeing them and having eye-to-eye contact and having to kind of impress somebody for the first time without, it takes a lot of guts to do that. So technology is a lot of the problem. And so my advice, particularly to young men, is to try and go on a diet, to try and reduce that. And just tell yourself quite simply that if you don't do this, if you don't get out of your pornography, your video games, your addictions to your phone, stop spending so much time on them, then you're messing with your own brain, and by the time you're 30, you're going to have lots and lots of problems. It's really holding you back in life. If you're not ambitious, then none of this advice will have any impact on you. But if you are ambitious, realize that you're sabotaging yourself, you're holding yourself back. And so I don't think any program will help on that level, because the tech companies have so much power, they have so much money, that they're not going to, disarm themselves. They're not going to agree to any of these things. It has to be up to you as an individual to make a decision that this is destroying my brain, this is destroying my life, it's not making me a social animal, right? And so I have to let go of it. You can't go cold turkey, you can't suddenly throw away all your technology. It has to be, as I say, kind of a diet. You have to go say, all right, I'm going to reduce it for an hour. I'm on the thing for like 4 hours a day. I'm going to try and reduce it an hour, slowly, bit by bit by bit. And I'm going to force myself to go out in the world. It can't be it can't be something that somebody foists upon you. It has to be an individual decision. Of course, if it gets some momentum and you see your friends doing this, I think then maybe it could turn into kind of a cultural movement. And my hope is, because we are humans, because we're animals at heart, and that because the social element, the canine element that you mentioned is so powerful within us, that a point will be reached where young people will be really fed up with this and will have a hunger. I might be being a bit Pollyannish there, but I think a point like that could be reached, and then it could turn into a cultural movement.
I hope so. Let's move on to seduction. Speak about the differences between cold seducers and warm seducers.
A cold seducer is generally a man, but it could be a woman. In the past, courtesans were cold seductresses, and the coquette is a typical cold seductress. But a cold seducer is basically able to control themselves to a high degree. Their interest is either they want something out of the other person. For a man, that will generally be sex. Back in the day, back 100 years ago, and it still persists today to some degree. For a woman, it could be getting money, right? But they want something out of it, or marriage, or whatever it is. And so their heart isn't really into it. They're in there for something else. And so in order to do that, in order to make that successful, they have to be very good actors, because if somebody is trying to seduce you and you detect that there's a manipulation involved, if you detect that they're cold, that at heart they're after something, after they want sex or they want money or they want marriage, it's very hard for you to fall under their spell. So the cold seducer is a bit of a paradox, because they know how to make it seem like they're interested in you. They know how to make it seem like they love you. And they draw you into their world. And when they get what they want, then that's the power that they have. Whereas a hot seducer is somebody who is genuinely, absolutely seduced first by the other person that they're seducing. And those are kind of the best seductions. So you fall in love with somebody, you're so interested in them, but they're not maybe interested in you. Now, in order to get them to like you or to love you, you have to seduce them, you have to draw them into your world, you have to go through some of the things that I talk about in the book. But you're emotionally engaged, you're hot, you're after them, you want that. And once you get them involved, then that kind of back and forth of both of you being kind of emotionally engaged creates a really beautiful dynamic, and things can proceed. But it all comes down to what you're after and the level of emotional engagement that you have with the other person.
I love that. We talk a lot about that sexual desire, while it's been pathologized, can be a wonderful thing that can turn you into a better man, make you want to be kinder, make you want to be more successful, make you want to groom, make you want to dress better, make you willing to take risks, make you a better man. Well, we're pivoting around to, you had a lot of books we want to touch on here. You said in your book Mastery, where you said it was a way of showing there's more to success than just power and seduction, that real fulfillment takes time and depth. What were you seeing in society that made you want to deliver this message?
Well, I was seeing the fact that we live in a culture that's so technologically proficient that people weren't paying attention to what actually makes success in life, which is your brain, you know? And the brain is this insane instrument. It's incredibly powerful, incredibly complex, incredibly beautiful. And it has a certain kind of inclination, what I call a grain to it. And when you work with the grain of the brain, I'm sorry for the rhyming there, but when you work with it, amazing things can happen. You can flourish, you can become very creative, you can reach that level of mastery. And my worry and my concern was that with technology, people are relying so much on other things that they think everything is easy, everything can be fast, that if I want power or success, I can hack my way to it. I can get into cryptocurrency, and in a month I can make $1 million, and then I can do this, I can do that, I can do that. All these illusions. Whereas the truth of it is, true mastery, which is a beautiful thing to attain in any field, is something that lasts for 10, 20, 30 years. And it takes time, and it takes effort. It takes years of work. It takes a point of an apprenticeship of maybe the proverbial 10,000 hours, although some of that has been debunked. But it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort. And people don't want to hear that. They want to hear that I could do it in 4 hours a week. I could master something. I want to hack. I want a drug. I want someone to give it to me quickly. So my concern was people don't understand how the human brain works. It's so simple that when you spend time learning something that you love and that interests you, amazing powers start emerging from that.
What do you think separates, in addition to the 10,000 hours, someone who's a real master versus just average? And how do you think young people can try to sort through sort the signal from the noise and find something that they have the potential to be a master at? I think mastery creates reward. I've always found, don't follow your passion, follow your talent, where you can develop mastery. Help young people. A lot of people will say, how do I find my mastery?
Well, the first part of your question, I mean, some people will spend 20,000 hours, I don't know, just put a number on it, and they don't end up becoming a master. So this man wrote to me, said, I've been a painter for my whole life. I've been painting for 40 years. I'm in my 50s now, and I'm not a master. So Robert, that debunked your idea. And what I tell him, my answer to that is, it's not a question of hours. It's a question of intensity. What makes a master is somebody, by the time they're 25, have put in, the amount of work that you put in by the time you're in your 50s. Because the human brain is most creative and most fluid when you are younger. And so you want to build those hours in that intense practice and discipline when you were younger, because that's when you were most creative. So that by the time you have put in a lot of hours and things start clicking in your brain, you're 29, you're 30, the brain is fluid, things are happening, you've got energy, amazing things will happen. It won't happen. It can happen, but it'd be as likely to happen when you're in your 50s and 60s. You're more set in your ways, you're more rigid, your brain is slowing down. So it has to be a function of intensity. But when it comes to finding your life's task, which is the first chapter of mastery, and quite frankly, to me, it's the most important thing in life. Even in Power, of all the books that I've written, it's the most important thing for anyone to find in life. Because when you find out what you were meant to create, what your task is, what you say your talent lies in, there has to be, of course, an element of love in it. The whole world just opens up, right? You will gain power. You will be good in the seduction game. Men or women will come to you because you're moving in the direction that your brain wants you to move in. You're learning quickly. You're becoming creative. And you fulfill, your dreams from when you were younger. I think the worst feeling for people that I found, the most tragic thing, is to get into your 50s and tell yourself, God, I could have been something else. I went down a wrong path. I could have found what I wanted to find, and I didn't do it because I listened to other people, because I was more interested in money than I was interested in mastery. And it's a regret, and it's too late at that point. So it's a function of emotional, and we talked about this in seduction, it's almost the key for everything, is your emotional engagement. So you're not going to learn, you're not going to put in those 10,000 hours or whatever it is that's required if you don't actually love or have some degree of an interest.
All right, thank you.
Very deep and profound. So if you're told to become a lawyer because that's what your parents told you to do, but it doesn't connect to you emotionally, you could spend 100,000 hours as a lawyer, but you're never going to reach a point of mastery because it doesn't connect to you. The brain learns fastest when you're in love with what you're learning, So you've got to figure out what that is. And it's a process. It's not easy. It's not like I could give you a formula to tell you how to do that tomorrow. You have to go through a process of introspection. You have to look at things that really, really, truly excite you. The great psychologist Abraham Maslow talked about impulse voices in infants. Infants have these voices inside of them say, I like this food, I don't like that food. I like this activity, I hate that activity. It's not something that they can verbalize. It's something very deep inside of them. And all of us have these impulse voices when we're very young. But we stop listening to them as we get older. And we lose touch with what we really like and what we really don't like. We're listening too much to other people, particularly in the era of social media. So a lot of figuring out your life's task is getting rid of all that noise, of getting rid of what everybody is telling you. It's getting rid of what the culture is telling you. It's getting rid of what people on social media are telling you. And it's listening to yourself and listening to what you love. I mean, I could go on for hours and hours, and I wrote a book on it about your life's test because there are other things I could talk about, but I don't want to take up all our time. But the main thing is going into yourself and not listening to other people that will help you get there.
One of the things we talk a lot about here is storytelling, and you're such a great communicator and storyteller. What advice do you have for someone who wants to develop their skills as a storyteller?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I take that very seriously. It's what I work the hardest at because it is my belief that a book or any kind of idea, people are resistant to. There's pain involved. I've got to read 30 pages. I have to listen to somebody on a podcast. It's too painful. But when you tell a story, all of those resistances go down, and people want to enter into it. And they want to hear it. They want to hear what the ending is. They want to hear what the moral of the story is. It's a brilliant way to seduce people into your idea, to trick them into it in a way. And so the kind of storytelling that I do is you don't want to be overwhelming people with fancy words, right? I hate people who overwrite. I hate people who think that they're so clever that they can be all into like the language itself. You must think that a story is a form of communication. You are communicating something through your story. The idea, the premise, the thesis, whatever it is that you're trying to communicate. Get rid of all that extra verbiage and be direct. And tell the story in a plain, pared down fashion. To me, is much more powerful. Then keep aware that in each paragraph of your story, people are either engaging or they're disengaging. You want to keep them moving inside that story, almost like a landscape that you're leading them through so that they don't like deviate and go off and are bored. So each moment you have to think, am I engaging the reader? Am I making them want to go on? How do I do that? How do I create suspense? How do I make them feel that there's something coming up that they want to keep finding out, but that in the end isn't what they expected, because the surprise or the unexpected is the most powerful form of storytelling. But the gist of it is never losing sight of your audience, never losing sight of that reader, their psychology, and the fact that they could be bored by what you're doing. They're going to be suddenly disengaged from the flow of your story, and avoid that. That's to me the best advice I can give for a storyteller.
We'll be right back. Support for the show comes from SoFi Small Business Lending. You're a small business owner, you need capital to find your way. I also offers business owners curated tools, vetted business bank accounts, business credit card recommendations, your own narcissism, irrationality, grandiosity, and aggression. All under the auspices of talking about masculinity. What did that process teach you about what it means to be a man in today's world?
Well, I grew up in a different era. Now, my father, because our fathers have a big influence on our concepts of masculinity. And my father, he was a very quiet man. He wasn't boisterous. He wasn't out there. It wasn't like performative masculinity, which is what we see a lot of nowadays. He was very quiet. He was a salesman. He worked at a job for 40 years of his life. He was very solid. But he was really good with people. And so my idea came from him, which is a kind of a quiet strength, a kind of calmness, a kind of the ability to not get freaked out about everything, to not be so emotional and yelling, and to just be calm and centered and kind of infect other people with that calmness. So my idea of masculinity had very much to do with him. And then, of course, from that, there were icons in the culture at the time, like a person like John F. Kennedy, who had that kind of quality, that charisma, very calm, but very confident, kind of projected it. And it was very, very, to me, that was kind of my icon of masculinity growing up, even though I was like 5 or 6 years old at that time. But he had a huge impact on the 60s. So these icons, these role players, play a huge part in forming your idea of what it means to be a man. And today, the role players, the people, the icons that we look up to don't have those qualities at all. They're very performative. They're very emotional. They're very aggressive. They're about being in your face. It's kind of this idea of The more I show how aggressive and masculine I am, that means that is how masculine I am. But it's a farce. It's a total con game. The more people, this is what my father told me, the more you're out there aggressive, pushing, the more you're revealing your deep, deep insecurities. You're actually a little baby, a little child inside of there. You're not strong, you're not calm, you're not centered, you're not masculine. You're performing what you think it is, but you're not feeling it. And when it's the Andrew Tates of the world and the others, whose names I won't mention for reasons I don't want to get in trouble, if those are all of your icons, then you're lost, because you think that's what matters. And the problem is it's going to cause you so many issues in life, because it's a quality that in the end puts people off. It might work here and there in some environments, but you're going to be offending more people than you're getting allies on your side. So I don't know if I'm answering the question or not, but the problem for us today is these icons that we have. We don't have anymore the kind of calm, quiet, centered, kind of rational sort of icon of masculinity anymore. Kind of, to me, if I think of a movie, because I love watching old movies, I think of Gary Cooper in High Noon, one of my favorite movies. And he has to face all of these stressful situations, these people trying to kill him. He's got really good values. He's there to protect other people. He's going to get rid of these horrible people who are invading this town. But he's not hysterical. He's not violent. He's just doing what he needs to do to get the job done. We don't have those anymore in our culture. It's really, really sad. It's really depressing. I don't know what I could do personally to bring that back, but I think that's the source of the problem. Did I answer your question?
You did your best, but this is a difficult question to answer. I'm writing a book on masculinity and trying to outline an aspirational vision of masculinity without it digressing into something that feels sexist or misogynist. It tries to take the best of what the Gary Cooper masculinity, but also evolve it, recognizing the world has changed, and that there's some wonderful things about the progress women have made that we don't want to diminish, and we also don't want to in any way not acknowledge the immense challenges women still face. But there is a notion that, the way I see it, the far right wants masculinity to be cruel and coarse. The far left wants masculinity to act more like a woman. And there's got to be something different than both of those things.
Definitely, I completely agree with you. But one thing that you mentioned there is part of that masculinity is being very respectful of women and not feeling like they're this inferior species that you like need to protect them and control them. That certainly doesn't work in our era, but that's never was, to me, that kind of icon I'm speaking of masculinity. But to create something that's not on the right or the left, it has to be things like your books will help a lot. I find though that preaching about things, which of course I'm going to be slightly guilty of here, doesn't really work so well. So you have to find ways to kind of seduce people into other roles and to other ways of being, which is why I say if we had people in our culture that would kind of embody this new 21st century form of masculinity, it would really help if we saw those kind of figures in our films, our television shows, and books that we read, or whatever our culture is. It would really help. But we have the opposite. We have the rap stars, we have the politicians, we have the movie actors. It seems all about just being cruel, as you say. So I'm a bit pessimistic about this in the present. Maybe you can help me. Maybe your book will help.
It seems like a lot of young men are really struggling and lost. What advice would you have for kind of younger men or parents or single mothers of younger men who are struggling? Do you have any sort of best practices around coaching young men?
Well, I have mentored a few, and there are a couple that I'm dealing with right now, and it's very difficult because the culture is against them. And I try to, first of all, I think the example that you set, as I said with my father, the kind of calmness, the energy that you have is very, very powerful. It communicates in a very direct way. So if you're saying that, truly being